Sorry about that, guys. I jumped straight in without without doing the opening title screen. Whatever. Okay, so welcome to the stream. And as per usual, we're jumping topics again. So for those of you who don't know, I'm not a single topic streamer here. I am the Uber of all generalists, and I cover everything and anything to do with being digitally creative. Yesterday, I had some writing streams, which unfortunately ended up in the wrong category, so I apologize to you budding writers out there who are looking for some insights into storytelling. Today, I start my first exploration in terms of Blender versus the universe. So, a little background on that. I've been working in the entertainment industry. God, it's been close to 15 years now. And I've used a wide variety of software. My training was initially in XSI, and then I migrated to, actually my first projects were in 3D Studio. So 3D Studio Max, and then I trained in XSI for several years, and then moved to Maya. I've used Mudbox, I've used ZBrush, I've used Motion Builder in production. I've used Houdini as well in production. So I've had a wide gamut of experiences in terms of software. And that's all the CG stuff. Let's talk about the 2D animation side of things. So traditionally, I came into the animation industry doing, pencil paper and then scanning it and all that kind of business. And then there was CTP. Yeah, Cartoon Television Program was the de facto digital ink and paint and layout and animation piece of software. And Toon Boom came onto the scene and then eventually evolved to Toon Boom Harmony. So I've used Toon Boom Harmony, and I've also used very, very briefly the raster-based TV Paint. So TV Paint was awesome. That was good. Toon Boom Harmony, a little bit harder to get used to, but because it's more like Adobe's Flash in the beginning at any rate. But I've used that one as well, and Toon Boom Storyboard Pro. So, and I'm just not even scratching the surface of the different pieces of software that I've used. I've used Marvelous Designer for class simulation and things like that. And the list goes on. So I was recently introduced to Blender by one of my friends who's a Blender guru. And what caught my interest was the cloth simulation brush. Now, that didn't pull me all the way in. But the cloth simulation brush made me go, wow, how are they doing that in real time? So that piqued my curiosity, as well as the small file sizes in Blender. It's unbelievable. I couldn't understand how they could get such a small footprint in terms of file size. What put me over the edge was Grease Pencil in 2.83. So I started taking a look at Blender, and the more I peel back the layers, the more I'm like, wow, this is really, really, really cool. So I'm going to pit Blender against everything else. As well, to be fair, when I was working at Electronic Arts, we did test out Blender for a couple of weeks and wrote it off. At the time, it was really far too unstable for it to be useful in any kind of production. But now it seems to be rock solid. It's got a Python backend, which really suits me fine. So any customizability, I can just write in to a certain degree. And its open architecture allows us to kind of add our own things to it. But that's a whole other topic. Let's just kind of dive in. Now, to give you a bit of background, I've just started learning Blender. So I will be stumbling around in terms of trying to find my feet and trying to figure out this piece of software. But I will start how I typically start in terms of setting up a project, and I'll walk you through that process, including me dipping out to another window to go, how do they do that again? Or like Googling for what is that one feature? What were the hotkeys again? And you'll probably kind of see me hunting around through there. I'm going to later do a tighter video about Blender versus the universe. And that one will be slated for a future YouTube channel. Okay, so for now, let's get stuck in. The first thing I generally tend to do is, I'll tell you what. I oftentimes use a project as an excuse to learn a piece of software, right? Because nothing is more incentive in terms of figuring out a piece of software than having a deadline light a fire under you, So, and a lot of people say, yeah, that's risky. But, I generally tend to pick lower profile projects that don't have a huge dependency, and also the type of deliverable that if I get stuck, I can easily migrate to another piece of software and finish it off, right? But I love testing out new software, learning new software in a project context. And I'm not a huge fan of, here's the UI, here's how you create a cube. These are the different things you can do with a cube. Nah, that's not for me. So let's talk about what we're going to be doing here. So I was approached by a television producer who on spec is trying to pitch a children's program, right? So we sort of bandied about the idea of putting together a little bit of a teaser. So I'm going to do what I always do, is just create one and surprise her and say, look, this is what you can do. You can present this with your pitch material if you so choose, and then we'll see how far you get. So the very first thing I always tend to do, and my students know this, is always set up my directory. Now, this is just a one-off animatic, but I'm always kind of thinking about a larger project in context. So I try to think about how things are connected. So this is going to feed into today's sort of stream, because I'll be talking about how I link various assets, not only within a directory structure, but inside of Blender itself. And the phenomenal way Blender organizes itself. It's very, very similar to the way Houdini deals with context and things like that. So I really sort of like it, and I do have suggestions for the Blender team in terms of where to take it to the next level. So in this regard, I've got my Universal folder. Now, I had to debate whether or not I wanted to put that on my cloud drive so I can access it from all my devices. So there's my cloud drive, which is mounted as a drive letter using a piece of software called Ray Drive. So this feeds directly into my Google Cloud Drive. And I've also got a hard drive that I'm syncing to my NAS server located offsite using Perforce. So I decided to create the project inside my Perforce server. Not only because there's a certain amount of security that I'll probably need a little bit later on, but I can also access the Perforce server from anywhere, any machine and things like that, right? So inside here, I just simply went in and created inside my TV folder, a folder for children's programming and the super secret project and teaser one. And so inside the teaser folder, I've created a teaser folder to keep that teaser separate so that it doesn't get mixed in. Let's say we went on to produce the pilot. This teaser folder wouldn't get mixed in necessarily with the pilot. However, it is encapsulated, so I can grab it, copy it, place it anywhere, and all the project materials are inside that, right? So I've got the usual development folder, release folder. Release folder only has the final copy of anything I ever do. Usually stays empty all the way towards the end. And then the development folder, I've just created two folders. The content folder to create my digital assets, which will then be referenced, or in Blender's case, linked into the animation folder. In the animation folder, I've got a layout folder, and the layout folder is where I set up my shots and my scenes. Now, I don't have a script for the teaser yet. I have a concept floating around in my head, but I decided not to write the teaser, and there's a real big reason for this. I'm dealing with an experienced executive producer who has her own writer's room. And there is a hierarchy and a process within which to pitch yourself as a writer and end up in the writer's room. So for me to just write a 2-page, even if it's just a 2-page teaser script and submit that to her, I think would be rather rude, right? And if any of her, not just from her point of view, but if any of her staff writers found out I did that, that would just put me in a negative light straight away, and nah, it's not worth it. But you can dive straight in and work things out on a visual level, and that won't really kind of impinge upon the writer's territory. One thing about working in like a semi-professional or professional environment, when you're working in a professional production environment with a TV producer, hierarchy is really, really important. So I'm just going to dive in and just muck about with a few ideas. Now, she doesn't know this is coming, so it's very, very low risk. And if I don't manage to pull anything off, then that's fine. We can just pull the plug at any point, but it's a wonderful opportunity to learn Blender. Okay, so let's go into Blender and set up our scene, right? So the folder structure is set up straight away. I'm going to start with a new Blender project. Let's go into So it's not a sculpting pro. Let's bring up a general project. I'll save that off. That was just me mucking about, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this cube. We don't need that at the moment. A little placeholder. And let's kill that. The delete key doesn't work, so we'll do it that way. All right, so we got a camera and we got a light and we got our scene collection. Okay, so the one thing that I love about the structure of Blender is this idea that you can build your entire animatic inside a single Blender project, right? So this is a fantastic way of working. Very similar in context. If you take a look at Houdini, you can create an entire node tree that does one particular effect. Let's just say you're exploring an explosion, right? So whatever. Explosion, you've got your node tree that does your flames, your temperature, your fuel burn, the cloud billowing, self-shadowing, all that kind of stuff, right? And then inside the same scene, you can create a brand new node tree, which will make your explosion invisible, and you can work on the debris of the plane blowing up, right? And the benefit of this is that, yes, inside the Houdini scene, you can just completely focus on the debris of the plane, but at some point, you can light up the node tree for the explosion, and you can say, well, now I want to see these two working together. I'm super simplifying it, but that sort of flexibility is wonderful. And I noticed that with Blender in terms of its scene creation, right? So I'm going to come over here to this setting here. Actually, first, let's see. We've got our layout folder. One of the things I'm going to add straight away to my folders here is the general, where are you? The video editing, right? So let's pop over in the video editing, right? So this is it looks very much like a nonlinear editing suite. It obviously straight away, it strikes me as being not as fully featured as like Avid or Premiere or Final Cut, which I've used all three. But it's not meant to be that. I think there was a Blender spokesperson who said they don't want to compete with the nonlinear editors out there. And what they're currently trying to do, and I don't know if it's fully implemented in 2.83, is they're trying to make the video editing sort of arm of Blender more closely associated with layout, sculpting, and modeling, which is what it should be. It should be, if you think about Nuke's Hero is a nonlinear editor. It's Nuke, the Foundry Nuke's version of a nonlinear editor, but it's specifically designed to work with a VFX editor and compositing shots, right? Now it can do a lot of the nonlinear editor stuff, but really primarily it's for the VFX editor and it's to farm out Nuke shots. Yeah, I'm super simplifying it, but really that's what it's for. And it keeps all of your Nuke composite shots nice and organized. So I envision this in a very, very similar context. This video editor is to keep all of this other stuff nice and organized. That's really what should be at the heart of it, right? If you start competing with other nonlinear editors, you're, in for a world of hurt. Okay, so with that set up, I'm going to create two new scenes. I'm going to leave this scene the way it is for the time being. I want to create a couple of scenes here, right? So I'm going to pop over into my scenes view. This is the one thing I like about this particular outliner, right? Unlike Maya's outliner, which you have to type in search flags to be able to see various different objects and filter them and this kind of thing. This is just a nice way of organizing, right? So we've got scenes, view layers, sequences, Blender file. This is fantastic as well because you can sort of parse a Blender file and see all the different subfolders. Yeah, I will talk a little bit about that, right? So the one thing I like about this Blender file, it's sort of an encapsulation of what you would experience inside of Maya with the project directories that are created default. This approach really reminds me of a Mac, right? So in terms of applications that you get on a Mac, you get this self-contained, almost like a black box for the application. But you can click on it and search contents, and then it'll open up and I'll show you all the folders and stuff like that, right? So it's a layer of abstraction that I really like. I like the fact that I can move Blender files around, knowing that the entire hierarchy or directory structure or dependency structure is going around with it, right? So it's just a nice way of encapsulating things. But let's pop back into the scenes. So I've got my master scene here, right? What I'm probably going to do is I'm going to create this as an asset library, right? Now, here's where I'm going to create all of the objects that I will be using in terms of planning out this particular animatic, right? So the other thing that I need to create straight away, which I don't necessarily like, but let's create it and get into it. I'm going to create another new scene. Hello? No, that's a view layer. I am creating the wrong things here. So I want to create a new scene here, right? And, oh, I must have created a whole bunch of different view layers. My bad. So in this particular scene, I'm going to call this the edit, right? Now, I don't necessarily like this, but it looks like you cannot completely utilize the video editing software unless you create a scene that's separate for just editing. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Hey, I got a hello from Mango Krigaren. Hey, how's it going? Yeah, here's me sort of stomping around inside a Blender, trying to figure it out. Okay. So there's a few interesting things about the video editing system that I find really, really powerful. If any of you guys use the Unreal Engine, I use it quite heavily in my day-to-day work because I teach it as well. The Unreal Engine has their camera sequencer and their level sequencer, right? So yeah, actually Maya has a camera sequencer. We'll talk a bit about that. And Unreal has their level sequencer. So both Maya's camera sequencer and the level sequencer have the same sort of ethos. It's how do you package up a series of disparate cameras and shots and bundle them together so that they can be worked with in a non-linear, non-destructive editing timeline. What I like about Blender's video editing is that it treats the clips that you pull into the timeline very, very much the same way Unreal treats actor objects. So when you create a clip inside the level sequencer inside of Unreal, it's not just a video clip. All the assets are inside that. So this is the one thing that I like about Blender's video editor and why they should stay separate from other nonlinear editors and not compete in that playground, right? Okay, so I've got that sort of asset library. I'll show you what I mean by the video editor needing to remain separate. So let's come in here and we'll create another scene. This time I'll make sure I'm on the correct scene. Now, there are a few different ways of creating a scene. I've been creating new scenes, so it's probably going to come bite me on the ass until I really get my head around the workflow. But we can also copy the settings from an existing scene. So my understanding about that is if I come into a scene and I set up certain render properties or certain custom properties, then when I come in here, I can create a new scene, but the settings will go into the new scene container, right? So that's quite handy. The linked copy will create a copy or an instance of an existing scene and link all the data over, but it won't do a physical copy, so you're not taking up any more render space. So this is what I was talking about the very small file size footprint of Blender and how they make it work. It's very efficient thinking. And then you can make a full copy, which, to be honest, guys, you should try and stay away from, right? Because everything in either a game pipeline or a CG pipeline is, as much as possible, instanced or tiled or referenced or linked or that kind of a thing. Very rarely, if you can get away with it, very rarely would you ever want to replicate an asset for efficiency reasons. Having said that, the one caveat is during pre-production, where I would oftentimes say, copy everything. Use up as much memory as you want whilst you're being creative. You cannot let any technological consideration infect your creative thinking, especially when you're pie in the skying stuff or blue skying ideas or really, you need to utilize your full creative power during the ideation phase. And then once you start rolling into production, that's when you start thinking about efficiencies and things like that. It takes a very, very practiced artist who can think of the both at the same time. So I don't recommend it when you're beginning. After you've delivered like 3 or 4 projects, it'll be built in. It'll be hardwired into your biology, right? So don't worry too much about that. And it's really, really important that during the creative phase, you keep your left brain separate from your right brain. Otherwise, you'll just come up with really, really bad ideas. And I've seen this happen. Okay, so let me pop in a dummy scene. So I'm going to create a new one, and we're going to call this guy scene 1, right? And no name for the scene yet, but that's okay. Can we rearrange these guys? See what I mean about Blender? And just figuring my way around here. No, we can't rearrange these scenes. That's okay. Asset library at the top, scenes sort of sorted below. That is not a sort filter. That's cool. That's all right. So that's our scenes view. Now, here, I'll show you what I mean. So if I'm in scene 1, so I'll double click on this guy. Ooh, it'd be nice if there was some kind of indication that I'm in that particular scene. Right? So, well, I suppose that's good enough. So I'm in scene 1. So let's pop over to the video editor. Let's say I wanted to add scene 1 to my timeline, right? So I'll come down to the timeline. Now, the timeline, the main menu has, if we come up here, the main menu has an add functionality, and that's to add stuff to the scene that you're currently in. But if you come to the video editing section, there's another add drop down here. And this is where you add elements, objects, actors, etc. into your timeline. So I'm going to come in here and add a scene, right? So I can add the asset library scene, I can add the edit scene, but I can't add scene 1 to scene 1, right? So it's what's called a non-recursive function. What does that? Non-recursive means you can't reference yourself, right? So you just can't you can't bring a copy of yourself into yourself, you know? So so this is why it necessitates having, I wonder if I can drop down. Yeah, it necessitates having an edit scene. So I got this edit scene. I don't think I need anything inside there yet. But notice when I flip over to the edit scene, I come over to add. Now I can add scene 1. Cool, right? So scene 1 pops in and shows up like this. This is what I love, right? It's not an image sequence. It's not it's not a footage of any kind. It is the actual scene itself with all the 3D objects. So this is fantastic, and it'll reference the cameras that you set up in the timeline. So here's what I'm thinking, guys. Initially, what I can do is I can set up a scene and I can add cameras here, and I'll show you how that works as I set things up. I might as well see if I can do that now. So I can come in here and I can add a marker, right? So that marker happens in the timeline. I can add, let's go to frame 20, and I'll add another marker. Oh, let's see. I'll add another marker there, right? So we got 2 markers, right? So if I grab this marker here, right, I can right click on it, and I can, where are we here? Do we have to bind? I think it's under this. Yeah, bind camera to markers, right? So I can take this and I can bind my camera. Oop, I need to select a camera. That, I think, would help. Oh, and my camera is in my scene collection here, or in my objects collection here inside there. So, you know what? I don't need these guys there. I wonder if I can just drag and drop these guys. Can I do it? Can I do it? No, it's not going to let me do it. I can't migrate elements from scene to scene. I wonder if I can do this. Let's try this. It makes more sense to have an empty scene with no objects in it as my asset library. Let's see if we can do just a quick, whoops. Oops. Let's see if we can do, no, that's kind of cool actually. I don't mind having sort of an outliner view and my scenes sort of, oh no, it's the same, no, it's the same view. Sorry, I thought I was looking at something else. Okay, so can I rename this? Yes, I can. So let's rename this scene 2. Can't rename it scene 1 because it'll create a redundancy, right? And then the scene 1, I'm going to turn that into my asset library. And again, I'll tell you why, because I don't need it. This has no camera or no lights. So that's perfect for my assets. But in here, I've got a camera and a light, and I need those there, so it's all good. Now, this will negate what I've got in the video editor, won't it? And it's just automatically deleted it. And it looks like I've got my first Blender freakout. So it didn't like that. So I've got some artifacting here. It looks a bit strange. But let's see if we can sort that out by just kind of coming in here and re-adding in... oh, okay. Let's zoom out. Am I inside my clip? I think maybe I might be inside. Oh, no, here it is. Let's go in and add scene 2. Oh, okay, there we go. So I'm just using the middle mouse wheel button. I don't know what the editing commands are yet, but it looks like it's not a smart edit, so I can't just grab this. Or can I? I can. The cursor just didn't change for me, so that was a bit strange. So this is what I like about this. I can create my layout and my camera animation over here, and by work on my animatic timing, etc. over here. How cool is that? That's just awesome. I love it. And having worked with the level sequencer is a little bit clunkier to wrap your head around because there's 2 versions of the level sequencer, the runtime version and the offline level editing version, and it can be quite confusing when it switches between the 2. This one's a little bit more straightforward, so I'm really super excited about that. Okay, so I've got my Scene 2 assets. I wonder how I can I just drag this back up? No, it keeps that window instance. I created a window instance by accident. So that's something I'm going to have to look up to sort of get rid of. No context sensitive. What's this? Oh, there's my sort. Can I rip this off? No, I can't rip this window out. So, oh, well, that's okay. It's a small thing. We'll work that out later. Okay, so that's cool. I've got my Scene 2. Now, this is where I'm going to test out the old, let's copy with the settings. That's cool. Ooh, in fact, hey, I got an idea, guys. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to delete this. Because a lot of times what I like to do is I like to take the natural naming convention. Here, I'll show you what I mean. So I've got a scene here, right? So if I come in here and I copy settings, yes, there's my Scene 1. That's cool. That's very cool. So I can keep this as my master scene, right? And then so I can, I wonder if it's linked. So if I made changes in here, would they replicate all the way through? It would have to be a linked copy, I think. Let's try that. So if I come over here, I delete this guy. I come up here and I create a linked copy. So will that mean any kind of adjustments? Let's try it. Okay, so if I come into this scene, so that's a select box, workspace. Now, I thought that this would give me global settings for my scene. So, well, regardless, let's come in here to the camera and let's see if we can change some camera settings. Oh, there we go. Render properties. Okay, cool. So if I go to my scene, right? Let's just change the render engine from Eevee to Cycles. Right? And then let's go to Scene 1. No, it didn't replicate. So those things are not connected. That's unfortunate. But that's okay. Let's see if something else happens. So that's my scene. So if I come in here and I take this and I call this sh_, which is my naming convention for shot cameras, and it replicates over here. Okay, that's cool. Not necessarily what we want because we want to be able to custom name our shot cameras. We don't necessarily want it linked. So perhaps that is not the way I want to go with this. What I probably want to do is come in here and let's just come in here and just copy settings, right? Well, that doesn't do it either. Notice what happened, guys? It looks like if I get this guy, let me try that again. So if I go linked copy, the camera and the lights appear. But if I go copy settings, they're gone. Okay, well, I prefer this, so let's go this way. And I've got a master scene object. Okay, so this is cool because now I can go into my edit project, head over here, and let's kill this. So, erase strips, yes. It's cool. And let's come in here and let's add those scenes back in. So I got scene 1 and that comes in. That's cool. Okay, so now it's time to save this. So I'm going to save this guy off. And those are my little projects. So we were going into the NAS drive, and I was going into my TV, children's programming, into the teaser, into the development, and layout. So here is trailer 1, animatic. Yes, I'll number that animatic 1, even though I'm committing this to Perforce, and so the versions will be kind of kept track by Perforce and stored on my server located at the university. So that's cool. But we'll save this guy off. Nothing in it as of yet. So the first thing I want to do is to kind of bring in my environment elements, right? But I'm just sort of happy with that. I just wanted to drop in here super quick and talk about how I set up my project in terms of using directory conventions. I was just about to say using Google Drive, but I'm not using Google Drive in this particular case. I'm using a piece of software called Perforce, which means that anything I create on this hard drive will be replicated to a server that's located off-site that I can access anywhere I have a computer with a connection to the internet, right? So that's where I'm setting up my project, and I wanted to go through scenes and how I set up scenes in terms of thinking about how they will fit in my edit timeline. The next stream, I'm going to talk about bringing environment assets in, and we'll start laying some cameras down. Now, the ultimate end goal is to be able to start building a 2D, 3D animatic, and you guys may have seen some tutorials out there. What I want to do is I want to walk you guys through my process. Again, the point of these streams, unlike typical tutorials, and if you have the patience for it, I generally walk you guys through all the little micro thought decisions that I make that most tutorial guys don't really cover. So you can see, why am I drawing the character this way? Why have I chosen that particular pen? Why am I bringing in those elements that way? Why did I set the camera up over there, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll talk through a lot of that, and at the same time compare this to some of the other pieces of software. Now, today, whilst I was streaming this, I realized, boy, I should have some other pieces of software open so I can contextualize it. I just realized some of you may not have used a lot of the software that I will be discussing. So the next stream, I'll try to have 1 or 2 packages open so that I can compare and say, look, this is how Houdini does it. This is how Hero does it. This is how Mari does it, and ZBrush, and etc. And we can pop back and forth and compare the two. But so far, Blender, yeah, I'm liking it. I know that Sir Wade, who has a series of Blender animation tutorials, he's working his way through being a Maya animator, getting into Blender animation, and he may have some different thoughts. But from a concept art animatic point of view, I am a kid in a candy store. I love the connectivity that they've built into a Blender. I love the fact that it's almost as if the developers have 1 or 2 really hardcore 2D animators on the team. And that's something I can completely relate to. And I love the fact that they've really kind of built that into their thinking. So next session too, I'll also talk you guys through how I've set up my Wacom tablet. It's really quite important, and how I've set up my navigational controls. So I'll probably do a couple of sessions on that, and I'll keep them separate so you don't have to watch them if you find it boring. So I'll talk about how I set up my Cintiq and then my Wacom Mobile Studio Pro, because they have 2 very, very different ways of laying out their controls, and how important it is that you give it a little bit of forethought. And a couple of things that are missing inside of Blender that would very, very much help the 2D animation workflow with experienced digital animators. Okay, so that's it for that. I will leave you guys to it. Thanks for checking out the stream, and we will continue our series of Blender versus the universe. Okay,